big dark eyes looking at me. He said it again, scentless breath. He started talking to me in a low, rushed voice. He began to tell me the tale. The point is, old Captain was a smuggler, a collector. I spent years with him. My mother had sent me to Andover, then brought me home. Couldn't live without me. I went to Jesuit. I didn't belong with anyone or anywhere, and maybe old Captain was the perfect person. But Winkin de Wild, that started with old Captain and the antiques he sold through the quarter, usually small, portable things. And I'll tell you right now, Winkin de Wild amounts to nothing. Absolutely nothing. Except a dream I had once. A very perverse plan. I mean my lifelong passion, aside from Dora, has been Winkin de Wild. But if you don't care about him after this conversation, no one will. Dora does not. What was this Winkin de Wild all about? Art, of course. Beauty. But I got it mixed up in my head when I was 17 that I was going to start a new religion. A cult. Free love. Give to the poor. Raise one's hand against no one. You know, a sort of fornicating Amish community. This was, of course, 1964, the time of the Flower Children, marijuana. Bob Dylan seeming to be singing all the time about ethics and charity, and I wanted a new brethren of the common life, one in tune with modern sexual values. Do you know who the brethren were? Yeah, popular mysticism, late Middle Ages, that anyone could know God. Yes, you didn't have to be a priest or a monk. Exactly. And so the monks were jealous. But my concept of this as a boy was all wound up with Winkin, who I knew him to be influenced by German mysticism and all those popular movements. Meister Eckhart, though he worked in a scriptorium and he still did old-fashioned parchment prayer books of devotion by hand. Winkin's books were completely different from those of others. I thought if I could find all Winkin's books, I'd have it made. Why Winkin? What made him different? Let me tell it my way, see? This is how it happened. The boarding house was shabby elegant. You know the kind. My mother didn't get her own hands dirty. She had 3 maids and an old colored man who did everything. The old people, the boarders, they were the hefty private incomes. Limousines garaged around the garden district, 3 meals a day. Red carpets, you know the house. Henry Howard designed it. Late Victorian. My mother had inherited it from her mother. I know it. I've seen it. I've seen you stop in front of it. Who owns it now? I don't know. I let it slip away. I ruined so many things. But picture this. Drowsy summer afternoon there. I'm 15 and lonely. An old captain invites me in. And there on the table in the second parlor, he rents to the 2 front parlors. He lives in a sort of wonderland of collectibles and brass and such. I see it. And there are these books on the table. Medieval books. Tiny medieval prayer books. Of course, I know a prayer book when I see it. But a medieval codex? No. I was an altar boy when I was very little. Went to Mass every day for years with my mother. Knew liturgical Latin as required. The point is, I recognized these books as devotional and rare, and something that old captain is inevitably going to sell. You can touch them, Roger, if you're careful, he tells me. For 2 years, he had let me come and listen to his classical records, and we'd take walks together. But I was just becoming sexually interesting to him, though I didn't know it, and it's got nothing to do with what I have to say until later on. He was on the phone talking to somebody about a ship in the harbor. Within a few minutes, we were off to the ship. We used to go on these ships all the time. I never knew what we were doing. It had to be smuggling. All I remember is old captain sitting at a big round table with all the crew. They were Dutch, I think. And some nice officer with a heavy accent giving me a tour of the engine room, the map room, and the radio room. I never tired of it. I loved ships. The New Orleans wharves were active then, full of rats and hemp. I know. Do you remember those long ropes that ran from the ships to the dock? How they had the round steel rat shields on them? Discs of steel that the rats couldn't climb over? I remember. We got home that night, and instead of going to bed, as I would have done, I begged him to let me come in and see those books. I have to see them before he sells them. My mother wasn't in the hallway, so I supposed she'd gone to bed. Let me give you an image of my mother and this boarding house. I told you it was elegant, didn't I? Heavy Renaissance revival, machine-made pieces, the kind of junked-up mansions from the 1880s on. Yeah. The house has a glorious staircase, winding, set against a stained-glass window, and at the foot of the stairs, in the crook of it, this masterpiece of stairs, of which Henry Howard must have been profoundly proud. In the stairway stood my mother's enormous dressing table. Imagine. And she'd sit there, in the main hall, at the dressing table, brushing her hair. All I have to do is think of that and my head aches. Or it used to when I was alive. It was such a tragic image. And I knew it, even though I grew up seeing it every day, that a dressing table of marble and mirrors and scones and an old woman with dark hair does not belong in a formal hallway. And the boarders just took it in? I asked. Yes, because the house was gobbled up for this one and that one. Old Mr. Bridley, living in what had been a servant's porch, and blind Miss Stanton in the little fainting room upstairs, and 4 apartments carved out of the servants' quarters in the back. I am keenly sensitive to disorder. You find around me either perfect order or the neglected clutter of the place in which you killed me. I realized that. But if I were to inhabit that place again... this is not important. The point I'm trying to make is that I believe in order, and when I was young, I used to dream about it. I wanted to be a saint. Well, a sort of secular saint. Let me return to the books. Go on. I hit the sacred books on the table. One of them I took from its own little sack. I was charmed by the tiny illusions. I examined each and every book that night, planning to thereafter take my time. Of course, the Latin was unreadable to me in that form. Too dense, too many pen strokes. Mind, you know of these things, don't you? Maybe we're surprising each other. Go on. I spent the next week thoroughly examining all of them. I cut school all the time. It was so boring. I was way ahead of everybody. And I wanted to do something exciting. You know, like commit a major crime. A saint or a criminal. Yes, I suppose that does seem a contradiction. Yes, it's a perfect description. I thought it was. Old Captain explained things about the books. The book in the sack was a girdle book. Men carried such books with them. And this particular one was a prayer book, and another of the illuminated books. The biggest and thickest was a book of the hours. And there was a Bible in Latin, of course. He was casual about all of it. I was incredibly drawn to these books. I smiled. Yes, I know exactly. Pages full of gold and red and tiny beautiful little figures. I took out a magnifying glass and started to study the pictures in earnest. I went to the old library at Lee Circle, remember it? And I studied up on the entire question, medieval books. Do you know Dora owns a convent? Yeah, I saw it. I saw her there. She's brave and doesn't care about the darkness or the aloneness. She believes in divine providence to the point of idiocy, and she can make something of herself only if she isn't destroyed. I want another drink. I know, I'm talking fast. I have to. I gestured for the drink. Continue what happened. Who's Winkin de Wild? Winkin de Wild. Winkin de Wild was the author of 2 of these precious books that old Captain had in his possession. I didn't figure that out for months. I was going over the little illustrations, and gradually I determined 2 of the books were done by the same artist. And then, in spite of the old Captain insisting that there would be no signature, I found his name in several places in both books. Now you know Captain sold these types of things. I told you. He dealt in them through a shop on Royal Street. I lived in terror of the day he was going to have to sell these 2 books. These books weren't like any other books. First off, the illustrations were exceedingly detailed. One page might contain the motif of a flowering vine with blossoms, and in these blossoms there were man figures intertwined, as if in a bower. Also, there were books of psalms, and when you first examined them, you thought they were psalms of the Vulgate. You know, the Bible. The Bible we accept as canonical. Yes, but they weren't. They were psalms that never appeared in any Bible. I figured that out much simply by comparing them to other Latin reprints of the same period that I got out of the library. This was some sort of original work. Then the illustrations. The illustrations contained not only tiny animals and trees and fruit, but naked people. And the naked people were doing all sorts of things. Bosh. Exactly. Like Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights. That kind of Lucius Sensuous paradise. Of course, I hadn't seen Bosch's painting yet in the Prado, but it was here in miniature in these books. Little figures frolicking beneath the abundant trees. Old Captain said, Garden of Eden imagery, that it was very common. But 2 books full of it? No. This was different. I had to crack these books, get an absolute clear translation of every word. And then old Captain did the kindest thing for me he'd ever done. The thing that might have made a great religious leader out of me, and may still make one in Dora, though hers is wholly another creed. He gave you the books. Yes, he gave me the books. And let me tell you more.